In the middle of the engagement lunch, my son-in-law raised his glass and said, "Your presence is bothersome." It was the last meal we ever had together. The table was set as always. The white linen tablecloth I inherited from my grandmother, the porcelain dishes I received at my wedding 25 years ago, fresh flowers from the garden I tended with so much care. It was Sunday, and I had spent the entire morning preparing a special lunch to celebrate my daughter Sarah's engagement to Thomas. The aroma of roast turkey hovered through the house, mingling with the perfume of the roses I had cut especially for the occasion. I should have been radiant. My only daughter, at 28, had found a man who seemed wonderful, successful, from a good family. The wedding was set for 6 months from now, and I had secretly planned the perfect surprise to buy them the dream house Sarah had admired for years in the most elegant neighborhood in the city. I had saved every penny of the inheritance I received after my husband died 2 years ago. But something was different that Sunday. Sarah avoided my gaze. Thomas answered my questions with polite monosyllables, and there was a tension in the air I couldn't decipher. During lunch, I noticed their whispers, the meaningful looks between them that did not include me. I smiled, poured more wine, asked about the wedding preparations, trying to break that strange atmosphere that had settled at my own table. "Mom, we need to talk about a few things," Sarah finally said, pushing food around her plate without really eating. Thomas nodded gravely, like someone who agrees with a decision already made. My heart raced. Had they found out about the house? Did they want to postpone the wedding? I had no idea that this would be the last meal we would share as a family. "What would you like to talk about, dears?" I asked, trying to keep a cheerful tone as I cleared the main dishes. I had prepared dessert too, a chocolate cake that had always been Sarah's favorite since she was little. Thomas cleared his throat and looked at my daughter, as if asking permission to speak. "Mrs. Peterson, Sarah and I have been thinking about the arrangements for after the wedding." His voice had a formal tone that made me uncomfortable. Arrangements? What a strange word to use among family. "We're going to move to Seattle. Thomas received an unmissable offer there," Sarah added quickly, without looking me in the eyes. Seattle, across the country. My world crumbled silently. "Oh," was all I managed to say, feeling the weight of future loneliness settle in my chest. How wonderful for you." I forced a smile. "When did you decide that?" "It's been a few weeks," Thomas admitted. "A few weeks? And I, like a fool, had finalized the house paperwork just 3 days earlier, imagining it would be the perfect surprise for the newlyweds. We'd like you to understand that it's a unique opportunity for us to build our life together, far from interference." The word hung in the air like a sharp blade. Interference. Is that how they saw my love, my care, my desire to be part of their lives? I swallowed hard and served the cake, my hands trembling slightly. "Of course, I understand perfectly. You're young. You need independence." But inside, something was beginning to break, and I still didn't know the worst was yet to come. They arrived, little by little, my siblings David and Patricia with their respective spouses, some cousins, close neighbors whom I had invited to celebrate the engagement. Sarah had insisted it should be a big celebration, so everyone can really get to know Thomas. Now I understood why. It wasn't a celebration, it was a public announcement of my future irrelevance. I had spent the whole afternoon preparing delicate canapés, arranging fresh flowers in every corner of the house, polishing the silverware that belonged to my mother. Every detail had been thought out with care, every dish chosen with the intention of creating a welcoming and elegant environment. When I saw the familiar faces arriving, Aunt Margaret with her warm smile, my cousin James, who always made a point of praising my food, the Millers, our neighbors who were almost family, my heart filled with a joy that would soon turn to ashes. During dessert, my famous tiramisu that had taken hours to prepare, Thomas stood up with a glass of champagne in his hand. There was something theatrical about his movements, as if he had rehearsed that moment. "I'd like to make a toast," he said, and everyone turned to listen with respectful attention. The buzz of conversation ceased instantly. "To Sarah, my future wife, and to our new beginning in Seattle." The words left his mouth with a clarity that cut the air like a blade. Murmurs of surprise rippled across the table. No one else knew about the move. I saw Aunt Margaret raise her eyebrows, confused. "Seattle?" my brother David asked, dropping his fork onto the plate with a clatter that echoed through the suddenly silent room. "What's this about Seattle? Eleanor, you didn't say anything about that." Thomas smiled, not the warm smile of a young man in love, but something cold and calculated that chilled my blood. "Sarah and I decided it would be best to start our married life with total independence. Far from—" He paused theatrically, his eyes moving around the table before landing directly on me. "Unnecessary influences." The words were like precise daggers, sharpened by the deliberate intention to hurt. The air in the room seemed to thin. I felt all the faces turn to me, some confused, others embarrassed, all waiting for my reaction. My neighbor Carol murmured a soft, "Oh my God." Sarah stared fixedly at her own lap, cheeks flushed with embarrassment. Or was it shame? "You know how some people can be," Thomas continued, savoring each word like a predator toying with its prey. "Too intrusive in other people's lives." My sister-in-law Helen furrowed her brow deeply, her expression clearly disapproving of Thomas's tone. Cousin James coughed uncomfortably. The atmosphere in the room had changed completely, from joyful celebration to something that felt like a courtroom where I was the defendant. "Eleanor has always been a very dedicated mother," David said in my defense, but his voice sounded hesitant, as if he himself were questioning that dedication. My own brother, who had watched me sacrifice so much for Sarah over the years, now seemed uncertain whether my love was appropriate. Thomas laughed, a low, cold, calculated sound that echoed through the room like a church bell announcing a funeral. "Dedicated is an interesting word," he replied, his eyes still fixed on me, measuring my reaction with the precision of a scientist observing an experiment. I felt my face burn with humiliation. Tears threatened to well up, but I refused to cry there, in front of everyone. "Sometimes," Thomas continued with an almost artistic cruelty, "too much dedication can become suffocating." At that moment, I understood with crystal clarity that I was being systematically torn down in my own home, in front of the people I loved most. And my own daughter, the girl I had carried in my arms through nights of fever, whom I had taught to take her first steps, for whom I had worked 2 jobs to pay for college, remained in absolute silence, allowing it to happen. "Sarah," I said with a voice I didn't even recognize, "do you agree with what Thomas is saying?" My daughter finally lifted her eyes, and in them I saw something that broke my heart, a coldness I had never seen before. "Mom, you need to understand that Thomas is right. After Dad died, you became very dependent on me. It's natural that I want to build my own family now." Her words were like ice. Dependent? Me, who had raised her alone during her teenage years while my husband traveled for work, who had worked 2 jobs to pay for her college, who had sacrificed myself in 1,000 small ways to ensure she had everything. "Sarah is right," Thomas continued, clearly encouraged by his fiancé's agreement. "She told me how you call every day, show up without warning, want to know every detail of her life. That's not healthy. Call every day. I called maybe twice a week. Show up without warning. I always asked before visiting. Want to know every detail. I merely showed a natural interest in the life of my only daughter. But there, in front of my entire family, those truths were twisted into cruel lies. "Your presence bothers me, Mom," Sarah finally said, the words leaving her mouth like a whisper that echoed through the entire room. "Thomas and I need space to breathe." Bothers. The word ricocheted inside my head like an endless echo. My presence, which had been her only support all her life, was now a nuisance. The silence at the table was sepulchral. I felt tears burn in my eyes, but I refused to cry there, in front of everyone. David and Patricia exchanged uncomfortable looks. Helen murmured something about, "Maybe this isn't the right time for this conversation." But I knew that this was exactly the moment when my life split into before and after. On Monday morning, I was still processing Sunday's humiliation when my phone rang. It was Jennifer Walsh, the real estate agent who had helped me with the purchase of the house for Sarah and Thomas. My heart still raced every time I thought of the surprise I had planned, a 4-bedroom house in Willowbrook, Sarah's dream neighborhood, with a large garden and the gourmet kitchen she had always wanted. "Eleanor, dear, I need to talk to you about the Morrison house," Jennifer said, her voice filled with confusion. "I just received a very strange call from Thomas Richardson. He was asking if it's true that someone had made an offer on the property." My blood ran cold. Thomas knew about the house. How? Did he say anything else? Well, it was very odd. He said he had the right to know about any transaction involving that property, that he had a legitimate interest in it. When I told him I couldn't disclose information about other buyers, he became very upset. Legitimate interest, as if the house was already his, as if my gift was already his right. A wave of nausea hit me. "Jennifer, you didn't tell him I was the one who made the offer, did you?" "Of course not. But Eleanor, there's something else. He mentioned that older people sometimes make impulsive decisions they later regret, and that it would be better for everyone if certain transactions didn't go through." Thomas's words echoed in my mind. Older people, impulsive decisions. Not only did he know about my surprise, he was actively trying to sabotage it. But how had he found out? I had been so careful, so discreet. "Jennifer," I asked with a trembling voice, "are you sure you didn't mention anything to anyone?" "Absolutely. But, well, Sarah called me last week asking about available properties in the area. During the conversation, I ended up commenting that that specific house she had always admired had just received a very generous cash offer." My own daughter. She had found out about my plan and told Thomas, and now they were conspiring against me. That afternoon, something inside me refused to passively accept what was happening. For the first time in 2 years, since my husband's death, I felt a spark of determination ignite. I decided to investigate on my own. I called my friend Carol, who worked in the HR department at the company where Thomas was a supervisor. "Carol, I need a favor, but it has to stay between us," I said with a firmness that surprised me. "Of course. Eleanor, what happened?" "Did Thomas Richardson really receive a job offer in Seattle?" There was a pause. "Eleanor, Thomas resigned last week, but not to accept an offer in Seattle. In fact, he was fired 3 months ago for misappropriation of project funds. The company had been investigating for a while, but they gave him the chance to resign quietly to avoid criminal charges." The world spun around me. Thomas wasn't moving because of a career opportunity. He was fleeing a scandal. And Sarah, did she know? Carol, is there anything else I should know? Well, there are the rumors about him and that new secretary, Jessica. A lot of people saw them leaving together several times, but those are just rumors. Rumors. Of course, everything started to make sense. The rush to leave town, the hostility toward me, the need for independence. Thomas didn't just want to get rid of an interfering mother-in-law. He wanted to get rid of anyone who might uncover his true nature. But what about Sarah? Was she a victim or an accomplice? I decided to find out. I called my daughter. "Mom, I can't talk right now," she said as soon as she answered, her voice cold and distant. "Sarah, we need to talk. About Thomas, about Seattle, about many things." "There's nothing to talk about. I made it clear yesterday that we need space." "Space for what? For him to hide from you that he was fired for theft? For you to run away before anyone finds out about Jessica? The silence on the other end was revealing. She knew. My daughter knew everything. You knew. It wasn't a question, it was a statement. Sarah, you knew about everything and still chose to humiliate me in front of the whole family. Mom, her voice faltered for the first time. No, now you're going to listen to me. I felt a strength I didn't recognize take hold of me. I know about the dismissal. I know about Jessica. I know that you're running away and not moving for an opportunity. What I don't know is how my own daughter could become someone I don't even recognize. You don't understand the situation. Then explain it to me. Explain how the daughter I raised, who always had my unconditional love, could stay silent while her fiancé called me intrusive and suffocating. Explain how you could say that my presence bothers you. There was a long pause before she answered, and when she did, her voice carried a cruelty that cut me like a blade. Because it's true, Mom. Since Dad died, you've latched onto me like a leech. I can't even breathe without you wanting to know where I am, what I'm doing, with whom. I love you, Sarah. Everything I did was out of love. Your love suffocates. Thomas showed me what a mother should be like. His mother gave us space from the beginning, never interferes in our relationship, never keeps calling or showing up. She has her own life. Every word was a stab. And you think I don't have a life of my own? What life, Mom? You live for me and through me. That's not healthy. At that moment, something died inside me. Not just my relationship with my daughter, but the version of myself that had existed until then, the devoted mother, the woman who defined herself through the love she gave to others. You're right, I said, with a calmness that frightened me. I need a life of my own, and I'm going to start building it right now. I hung up the phone and sat in the kitchen that had been the center of my world for so many years. The yellow walls Sarah had chosen as a teenager, the floral curtains that matched the garden outside, the family photos scattered around the house. All of it suddenly felt like a museum dedicated to a life that no longer belonged to me. For the first time in 25 years of marriage and 2 of widowhood, I looked around and asked myself, what do I want? The question was so strange, it almost made me laugh. When was the last time I thought about what I wanted, independent of what my husband needed or what Sarah desired? I couldn't even remember. I got up and wandered through the house slowly, touching objects as if they were relics. The chipped mug Robert always used for coffee, the sweater Sarah had forgotten on the couch years ago, the bookshelves filled with novels I had bought because someone else wanted to read them. I realized how little of my life had truly been mine. I grabbed a notepad and started making a list, not of household chores or tasks for others, but of my own forgotten desires. The pen trembled in my hand as if unused to writing for myself. I wanted to travel to Europe, something I had always postponed for practical reasons. I wanted to stand in front of the Mona Lisa, to walk along the Seine, to get lost in the narrow streets of Rome. I wanted to take up painting again, which I had abandoned when Sarah was born. I remembered the unfinished canvas still in the attic, covered in dust, the colors frozen mid-stroke as if waiting for me to return. I wanted to read books that interested me, not just the self-help novels I thought would make me a better person for others. I wanted to reread the poetry I loved in college, to lose myself in stories that had nothing to do with sacrifice or resilience, but simply beauty. I wanted to learn something new, maybe Italian or French, to speak with strangers in markets far away. I wanted to take long walks by the sea, to eat bread still warm from a bakery I'd never visited before. The list grew, line after line, until it felt less like paper and more like a map leading me back to myself. I discovered with awe, a life that was mine. The phone rang again. It was Thomas. Mrs. Peterson, Sarah told me you two talked today. I think there's been a misunderstanding. There's been no misunderstanding, Thomas. There have been very enlightening discoveries. Look, about those things you heard. They're unfounded rumors. Envious people always try to bring down successful men. Successful men are not fired for misappropriation of funds. The silence on the other end confirmed that my investigation had been accurate. Mrs. Peterson, perhaps we can talk in person. I'm sure we can reach an understanding that benefits everyone. An understanding, as if my dignity were a negotiable commodity. Thomas, there's only one thing you need to understand. You completely underestimated the person you're dealing with. And I hung up. The following days were filled with absolute silence. Sarah didn't call, Thomas didn't insist, and I allowed myself, for the first time, the freedom of not having to please anyone. It was a strange and at the same time liberating feeling. Walking through the garden I had tended with so much care, I realized how many of my choices had been based on what others would appreciate. The red roses because they were my husband's favorite. The blue hydrangeas because Sarah thought they were romantic. The herb bed because I thought a good wife should cook with fresh herbs. When had I stopped planting what I liked? I called Jennifer, the realtor. About the Morrison house. I want to cancel the purchase. Eleanor, are you sure? You'll lose the deposit? I'm absolutely sure. And Jennifer, I want you to know exactly why I'm canceling. I told her the whole story. About Sunday's humiliation, about the discoveries of the week, about the conversation with Sarah. Jennifer listened silently until the end. My God, Eleanor, what a terrible situation. But are you sure you want to cancel? It's a gorgeous house. Jennifer, that house represented a dream I had for them, not for me. I'm canceling not out of anger. I'm canceling because I finally understood that I need to use my resources to build my own life. It was the clearest moment of lucidity I had had in years. But I'm going to ask you a favor, I continued. When Thomas calls, and he will, I want you to say exactly this. Mrs. Peterson canceled the purchase because her presence bothered them. She decided that if she bothers them that much, they can sort things out on their own. Jennifer laughed. Eleanor, I think you're rediscovering your backbone. She had no idea. On Thursday, I received an unexpected call from Helen, my sister-in-law. Eleanor, can I come over? I need to talk to you about what happened on Sunday. When she arrived, she was carrying a bouquet of daisies, my favorite flowers, not the roses everyone assumed I preferred. Eleanor, David and I were horrified by their behavior. We want you to know that we don't agree at all with the way they treated you. We sat on the porch, and for the first time in days, I felt I wasn't completely alone. Helen, can I ask you something? Do you think I really was a suffocating mother? Eleanor Peterson, you were the most dedicated mother I know. When Robert died, you held everything together on your own, worked like crazy to give Sarah everything she needed. If that's suffocating, then I don't understand motherhood anymore. Her words were like balm for my wounded soul. But maybe I really was too dependent on her after I was widowed. Eleanor, you called your daughter twice a week and visited on weekends. That's being a loving mother, not dependent. Any child who received that much love should feel blessed, not smothered. We talked for hours. Helen told me she had always thought Thomas was arrogant and manipulative, but never said anything because Sarah seemed happy. Now I realized she wasn't happy. She was being programmed to reject anyone who might see through his facade. When Helen left, I was clear about one thing. I wasn't crazy. My love wasn't suffocating. My presence wasn't a nuisance. I had been systematically and cruelly manipulated by a man who saw me as a threat to his ability to control my daughter. And it was time for him to find out that the threat was real. On Friday, I did something I hadn't done in years. I bought clothes thinking only of what I liked. No neutral colors or cuts appropriate for a woman my age. I chose a turquoise dress that brought out my eyes and a leather jacket that made me feel powerful. The salesgirl, a young woman in her 20s, smiled when I walked out of the fitting room. "Wow, you look radiant. That color is perfect." "You know," I replied, surprised by my own boldness, "I'm rediscovering who I am." "That's beautiful. My grandmother always says it's never too late to be reborn." Reborn. The word echoed in my mind for the rest of the day. On Saturday, I called my brother David. "David, I need to ask you a legal favor." "Of course, Eleanor. Anything." "I want you to recommend the best family lawyer you know, and I also need a private investigator." There was a pause. "Eleanor, is everything all right?" "Everything is great, David. For the first time in a long time, everything is great." The lawyer he recommended, Robert Chen, agreed to see me on Monday. The investigator, a woman named Linda Morrison, could start right away. "Mrs. Peterson," Linda said during our phone conversation, "may I ask what exactly the goal of the investigation is?" "I want a full report on Thomas Richardson, current financial situation, relationship history, anything that may be relevant to my daughter's well-being. And what if we discover things your daughter may not want to know?" "Linda, my daughter has already made her choice. This investigation is no longer about saving her. It's about protecting myself and ensuring I have all the information I need to make the best decisions for my future." It was true. For the first time, I was thinking about my future, not hers. On Tuesday, Thomas finally showed up at my door. I had been waiting for him, not just waiting for his arrival, but prepared for it. I had carefully chosen my outfit, the turquoise dress I had bought a few days earlier, subtle makeup that highlighted my eyes, and a straight posture I hadn't adopted in years. When I opened the door and saw his expression of surprise at how different I looked, I knew I was on the right path. "Mrs. Peterson, we need to talk. Jennifer told me you canceled the house purchase." His voice had that controlled tone I already knew well, the same tone he had used the previous Sunday to humiliate me. "Yes, I canceled it." My voice was calm, controlled, filled with an authority I hadn't known I possessed. "Come in." He hesitated at the threshold, as if sensing he was stepping into dangerous territory. But his arrogance prevailed, and he entered the living room where, just a few days earlier, he had publicly humiliated me. The irony did not escape either of us. Now, wearing my dress that made me feel powerful and with all the information Linda had provided neatly organized in a folder on the coffee table, I was in complete control of the situation. It was an intoxicating and, at the same time, frightening feeling. "Look, I know things got tense on Sunday," he began, keeping that condescending tone he always used with me. "But there's no need for drastic actions. Sarah and I talked, and maybe we were a little harsh with you." "A little harsh?" I repeated his words slowly, as if tasting their bitterness in my mouth. I let the silence stretch between us, watching him begin to squirm uncomfortably in the armchair. "Thomas, sit up straight. There are some very interesting things I need to tell you." I opened the folder Linda had handed me that morning. The sound of the pages being turned echoed through the silent room. "First, let's talk about Jessica Martinez, your co-worker, or should I say, ex-co-worker, since you were both dismissed for the same reason." I literally watched the color drain from his face. His hands clenched on the armrests, and for the first time since I had known him, Thomas Richardson looked genuinely frightened. "How did you—" he started, but I cut him off with an elegant wave of my hand. "Oh, Thomas, my dear Thomas." My voice was laced with sweet, poisonous irony. "Did you really think I was so pathetic, so insignificant, that I wouldn't uncover the truth? You completely underestimated me." I leafed through the documents with theatrical calm, savoring every second of his growing anxiety. "Jessica is 4 months and 3 weeks pregnant, to be exact. Congratulations, Daddy." "Eleanor, I can explain." His voice came out as a hoarse whisper. "There's no need to explain anything. It's all here in the investigator's report I commissioned." I held up an 8/10 photo that clearly showed Thomas leaving a hotel with a dark-haired woman. The business trips you two took together to Portland and San Francisco, the luxury hotels, the romantic dinners, the expenses paid with the company credit card, which, by the way, was exactly what led to the investigation that resulted in both of you being dismissed for misappropriation of funds. Thomas was visibly shaken, his hands trembling slightly. All his control, all his calculated arrogance had evaporated. Sarah doesn't need to know about this. We can reach an agreement. I can compensate you financially. An agreement. I stood up slowly, feeling taller and more imposing than my 5'3" had ever made me feel. Thomas, you still don't understand, do you? There's no more agreement, no more negotiation, no more manipulation. I walked to the window, turning my back to him, letting the tension build. You chose to treat me like a burden, like someone whose presence bothered you. You orchestrated my public humiliation, turned my own daughter against me, tried to reduce me to a pathetic and desperate woman. I turned to face him, my eyes locking onto his with an intensity that made him shrink back in the armchair. So now, my dear son-in-law, you're going to find out what it really means to be bothersome. Sarah already knows about Jessica, I continued, watching him turn even paler. I called her this morning and told her everything. About the pregnancy, about the lies, about the real reasons for the move to Seattle. You had no right. I had every right. I'm her mother, and regardless of how she treats me, I will not allow her to marry a man who is cheating on her and lying to her. Thomas jumped to his feet abruptly. Sarah won't believe you. She loves me. Thomas, you're right. Sarah didn't believe me. I paused, letting the suspense fill the room. She believed Jessica when she called her and confirmed everything personally. The expression on his face was one of absolute shock. You didn't? Oh yes, I did. And you know what else I did? I called Jessica's mother and told her that my daughter's fiancé is the father of the baby she's expecting. Mrs. Martinez is a very interesting woman, devoutly Catholic, traditional Mexican family. She's already on her way to town for a very serious talk with you. Thomas began pacing nervously around the room. Eleanor, you don't understand the consequences of what you're doing. I understand perfectly. The consequence is that the truth is finally coming to light. Oh, and there's one more consequence you'll find especially interesting. I pulled another document from the folder. Remember the house you thought would be yours? The Willowbrook house you were so legitimately interested in? Well, not only did I cancel the purchase, I told the Morrisons exactly why. They were so outraged by your behavior that they decided not to sell the house to you or Sarah, no matter the price. You can't do that. I already did. And do you know why I could? Because unlike you, I built a reputation of integrity in this town over the course of 25 years. When Eleanor Peterson tells a story, people believe it. Thomas left my house without saying a word. Through the window, I saw him stop at the car and make several desperate phone calls. 15 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Sarah. Mom. Sarah's voice was hoarse from crying, as if the words had scraped their way out of her throat. You were right about everything. Sarah, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. My own voice trembled, but it carried a steadiness I hadn't felt in a long time. No, Mom, I'm sorry for everything I did to you, for how I treated you, for the horrible things I said on Sunday, for believing his manipulations instead of trusting the woman who raised me with so much love. Her sobs broke through the line, raw and unguarded. I closed my eyes and pressed the phone tighter to my ear, memories flooding me like a tide. I saw Sarah as a little girl, standing in the kitchen with flour on her cheeks as she begged to help me bake cookies. I heard her laugh when she ran into my arms after her first day of school. I remembered the nights she would whisper, "Mommy, don't ever leave me." And now, years later, she was the one who had left me, with words sharper than any knife. Yet in her broken voice, I heard the child I once cradled returning to me. I felt tears sting my eyes, but this time they were tears of relief. Sarah, you're my daughter and you always will be. But some things have changed. I know, Mom, she whispered, and you have every right to be angry with me. I'm not angry, dear. I'm transformed. I've discovered that I need a life that belongs to me, independent of the love I feel for you. There was a long silence on the line, broken only by her uneven breathing. What does that mean? She asked, almost afraid of the answer. It means I will no longer live in function of others. I will travel, I will paint again, I will do the things I've always dreamed of. And you, my dear, will have to learn to be an independent adult. Her sobs returned, softer this time, almost like a release. I'm scared, Mom, she admitted. Without Thomas, without you, I don't even know who I am. You will learn, Sarah, the same way I'm learning. You are stronger than you think, and maybe, for the first time, we will both finally breathe freely. There was another pause, and then her voice came back, gentler, carrying a fragile hope. Can I visit you tomorrow? We have so much to talk about. I don't want to lose you. Of course, I said, a small smile forming on my lips, though my eyes were wet with tears. But Sarah, things will be different now. I know, Mom. I heard her inhale shakily, as if taking in the truth of it. And maybe that's for the best. 6 months later, I am sitting on the porch of my new house. Yes, I bought a new home for myself, smaller and cozier, perfect for a woman who finally learned to live for herself. The garden is blooming, but this time I planted only the flowers I love, daisies, lavender, and sunflowers. Sarah visits me once a week. Our relationship has been rebuilt on healthier foundations. Mutual respect has replaced unhealthy dependence. She moved into her own apartment and is in therapy to understand how she allowed Thomas to manipulate her against me. Thomas disappeared from town shortly after Mrs. Martinez's visit. We later learned from Jessica that he fled to avoid the responsibilities of fatherhood. Jessica, courageous and determined, decided to raise the baby alone with her family's support. Today is Sunday, and for the first time in 2 years, I didn't cook for anyone but myself. Instead, I'm preparing my paints to continue the canvas I started, an abstract painting in shades of turquoise and gold, colors that represent my transformation. The phone rings. It's Helen. Eleanor, how are the preparations for your trip to Europe? I'm so excited. 4 weeks visiting museums, seeing places I've always dreamed of. I smile, feeling a lightness I hadn't experienced in a long time. You know, Helen, all those years I thought my life had ended when Robert died. I discovered it was only paused, waiting for me to have the courage to restart it. And Sarah? How is she handling her new independence? Well, yesterday she called to ask how to make tomato sauce. We laughed together. She's learning to be a real adult, and you know what's most amazing? I'm proud of her for it. After hanging up, I look around at my little house, my garden, my rebuilt life. Last Sunday, exactly 6 months ago, someone said that my presence was bothersome. Today I understand it wasn't my presence that bothered them. It was my strength, my ability to truly love, my integrity. Men like Thomas fear women like me because they know that once awakened, a woman who has discovered her own worth is a force impossible to control or manipulate. I pick up the brush and dip it into the golden paint. On the canvas, a phoenix is rising from the ashes. It's the most honest self-portrait I've ever made. My presence no longer bothers anyone, because now it is completely mine. Many mothers know the pain of being told that their presence is a burden. Maybe you, too, have given everything, your time, your energy, your love, only to be pushed aside, ignored, or humiliated by the very people you raised. If this story touched something inside you, I invite you to share your own experience in the comments. This space is not for judgment. It is for listening, for healing, and for reminding each other that we are not invisible and that our voices matter. Your story might be the comfort or the strength another woman needs today. So please, don't hold it inside. Leave your words below and let us stand together.